Let's talk about Minishoot Adventures, a twin-stick shooter with adventure elements that will remind you of 2D adventure titles like The Legend of Zelda and other Metroidvania titles. This is currently out on Steam and it is one of my favorite indie titles of the year. I'm going to be giving away a Steam key of this game, so if you're interested, leave a comment below and I'll randomly pick a winner. The premise is simple. You are a shipling and your job is to restore balance. There are 4 major dungeons, and as you progress, you're going to eventually find yourself facing the final boss. But as this is an adventure game that is heavily inspired by Zelda, there is more to this than meets the eye. One of the most important aspects of an adventure game is how well it scales. As you progress, you need to be challenged, and that challenge needs to be fair, and Minishoot Adventures does a fantastic job in that regard. You are limited in terms of your ability at the beginning, as you can only shoot, and listen, you'll need to be proficient early on because as you progress and begin to explore new locations, you will fight new and challenging enemies. Did I also mention that this is a bullet hell? The game, while simplistic in its visual design, has no qualms about throwing the kitchen sink at you. There are a number of areas in which you'll be trapped and forced to face multiple enemies while the screen fills up with projectiles. I cannot tell you how many times I have sat there and gone, I am screwed, while there's just a number of things being thrown at me from all different sides and also enemies just chasing you. It's crazy. And your abilities to start are really basic, but you become more capable as you level up and upgrade your ship. There are a number of different traits that can be leveled up, and there are modifications that can be discovered or purchased for your ship. In my opinion, the most important ability that you're going to acquire is the dash. And this doubles as a jump of sorts, and it's going to help you clear gaps, which will get you to those areas that were initially difficult to reach. So if you ever see anything that's like out of reach, and you just happen to find yourself stuck in an area and you're probably racking your brain around like, how do I get there? Try dashing. You're going to be surprised at the distance you can cover. And I remember doing that a lot in the demo too, and it was something that really got me hooked onto exploration for the game. What really surprised me about this title is that the boss and challenge dungeons, when you eventually find them, are intricately designed. There are so many nooks and crannies, and the game really wants you to do your best while exploring. There are multiple keys and switches to find, and I found these to be a lot of fun. Basically, as I was going through these dungeons, you'll eventually come to know that almost all of these are just massive puzzle dungeons, and you really have to pay attention, you have to be aware of all these different things, and you have to know that it's not just enemies you're going to be facing, it's different obstacles, and those obstacles can be pretty jarring in terms of what they can do to you. Like, they won't just like hit you and knock you off, they'll insta-kill you and bring you back to the beginning of the dungeon. So these are the types of things you have to be aware of. Now, the arenas that are featured in these dungeons are genuinely challenging because they throw a number of different obstacles and enemies that require you to be locked in while you're playing. This is interesting to me because the demo did not prepare me for that at all. When I completed the first boss dungeon in the demo, I came away thinking that this was going to be a casual adventure game and I would give it a try once it was released. Because you're looking at this game and saying to yourself, the visuals are simple and clean, and they do an effective job of allowing the player to not get too distracted when facing multiple enemies. The music does a great job of getting you into the zone, and I figured that the game would eventually take the gloves off. I just didn't expect it to be so intense when it did. Once you progress to other dungeons, the game expects you to be comfortable with being swarmed. You are going to see a number of arenas where enemies of different sizes and strength are just throwing themselves at you. And believe me, the game wants to throw as many different combinations at you as possible just to kind of frustrate you, to ensure that you're being kept on your toes, to make sure that you're just not relaxing. Pretty much the only time you can relax is when that area opens up at the end. That's like the only time you have it, because most of the time you are dodging and dashing for your life. And you're also trying to maneuver these really small areas, and you really have to do your best to not stay still, because if you do, you will die. For myself, early on, I really tried to focus on damage and bullet speed because I thought that I would have time to maneuver around most projectiles. I was not prepared for some enemies to violently chase me or shoot massive orbs that force me to keep my distance. Now, luckily, you can downgrade your abilities, so if you feel like you made a mistake early on, just go ahead and take that damage or that bullet speed, downgrade it, and then add to movement speed or boost. I think that's a great system. I think that's something that's really useful in these types of games, and I really appreciate the developers' input on that. Me, though, I'm very stubborn, so I just try to keep close and do as much damage as possible. Now, even though I tried to keep close and do as much damage as possible, it didn't matter because look at what I was met with. Like, what is that shit? I'm just saying. This game has so many good boss fights, and some areas are going to have field bosses that you'll just randomly come across. And luckily, most field bosses do not have multiple phases. Now, sometimes they'll just speed up the projectiles, but most of the time it's just the same pattern, and that's cool. Like, I appreciate that. But you will know it's game time when you're in a dungeon, when the camera zooms in on the center where the boss is going to spawn and the music changes. Dungeon bosses have multiple phases, and some will have up to 6, which, let me tell you, will just shock you because they'll go from fairly basic patterns that are easy to navigate to just shooting a wave of projectiles at you, which are, it threw me off the first time I saw it. It was insane. I was like, what is this? Some will even shoot streams of projectiles to limit your maneuverability, but even in those instances, there wasn't a boss that I would consider unfair, which I think is something that should be said about the design of these bosses. At no point in time was I saying, that's cheating, that's messed up. It was really mostly my fault when I died. I would just get distracted. And that's pretty much on me. But I genuinely enjoyed every boss encounter and looked forward to them as long as they weren't summoning minions. Because listen, I'm already dealing with a lot of shit here, and I do not need the added stress. Now, when it comes to exploration, each location has a number of hidden paths and areas, and it can be a real challenge to remember it all. I know it was for me. Luckily, the starting location doubles as your hub and will house the shiplings that you save, and some of these will act as vendors. One of these shiplings that you'll discover early on will mark locations on your map, and that is only if you have found the map piece for that particular location. Just keep that in mind. You have to remember that this is an adventure game, and I mentioned before that it's heavily influenced by Zelda and Metroidvania titles, so once you get a new ability, you should always look to return to locations where that ability could be used, because you never know what you're going to find. You might find a new shortcut. You might find a relic that could help in regard to leveling up. And this all really depends on you. Believe me, you don't have to go into the final boss with some of the optional abilities. They're definitely going to help, but they aren't required. I fought the final boss while missing 2 special abilities, which, looking back, would have really helped when things were getting super hectic. But this isn't a game that's going to hold your hand. The map will indicate the next step. It will identify where the next boss is, but it's up to you to find the missing pieces, shiplings, abilities, and relics that can help make your journey easier. Overall, I think Minishoot Adventure is a quality title and one that I greatly enjoyed, but I will say that that's really all going to depend on you and how you feel about twin-stick shooters that emphasize bullet hell encounters. If that's not your cup of tea, then this game won't be for you, but what's here may be a pleasant surprise for you. It's a relatively short experience too. You should be able to complete the main dungeon and final boss in around 4 to 5 hours, but if you add in all the exploration, challenge dungeons, hidden paths, and some other things that I won't mention because it enters into spoiler territory, you actually might bump that figure up to 8 to 10 hours, and that ain't bad for a game under $15. There's also different difficulty options, one of them being advanced and pretty much where the bullet hells are far more stressful because projectiles are moving at a higher speed, and it just, I don't know why you do that unless you're like a masochist, but hey, you do you. And if you're not comfortable with manual aiming, you can utilize aim assist to make encounters more manageable. The only real issue I had with this game were the crashes I experienced when trying to open up the map. I don't know what caused the issue, but I would randomly open up the map when charting my next path and the game would just crash. I'm pretty sure that that's going to be patched eventually, but that's been my only issue, and it was random. Sometimes I would go hours without any problems and then a random crash would happen when pulling up the map. It was weird, and I don't know if other players have experienced this, but I figured I would mention it. Beyond that though, I believe that Minishoot Adventures was well worth the price of admission. And that's going to do it for this video. If you happen to like the content, please consider sharing, and subscribing. I'm Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I will see you in the stars.